Hello, thank you for joining us today for this Alliance for Community Trees network discussion on diversity, equity, and inclusion, with focus today on how our network organizations are responding to the ongoing racial injustice we've all been witnessing. My name is Matt Spitzen. I'm the program manager of the Alliance for Community Trees program at the Arbor Day Foundation, and I'll just be serving as your facilitator today. I want to say that I sincerely hope you, your families, your organizations, and your communities are all staying healthy, sane, educated, and informed during this time. I know it's been a really interesting 3+ months, and all of your organizations have been tested this year. Everywhere from how to keep your doors open and your mission alive during this new era of COVID-19 to how to handle, recognize, and respond to the severe racial injustice we continue to see every day. And that's exactly what we're discussing today. And that's what the Alliance for Community Trees Network is all about. We were hearing from our members that they wanted to learn more on how to take meaningful steps towards diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also how to communicate to their staff, board, and community about racial injustice. And let me be clear, we are very humbly aware that we do not have all of the right answers for you. But what we do know for certain is that there is so much value in this network and coming together as a peer community to share, learn, and grow with one another. Before I introduce you to our panel today, I'd like to share the format for our discussion. You'll be hearing from leaders from the 3 different Alliance for Community Trees member organizations, and they will focus on answering 3 questions around responding to racial injustice. The first one being, how are you responding to your staff? The second, how are you responding to your community? And the third and final question, how are you taking steps to be a positive piece to the solution? We will move question by question and allow each speaker to answer before moving on to the next question. And we realize that we'll naturally want to take a really deep dive into the programs our organizations are running that address these issues. But today's discussion is revolving more around how we're bringing up these issues with our staff, with our communities, with our boards, and what we're doing to be a positive piece to a solution. This is not the only conversation we'll be having around diversity, equity, and inclusion and racial injustice. We're getting ready to launch a handful of new Alliance for Community Trees working groups, one of which will focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. For those that are Alliance for Community Trees members, please be on the lookout for how to get involved with those in the next week or so. These working groups will help ensure we keep a constant drumbeat on the biggest issues within our network. With that being said, it's now my pleasure to introduce you to your panel today. Today, you're going to be hearing from Lionel Bradford, who's the president and executive director of the Greening of Detroit in Detroit, Michigan. And Lionel has been with the organization since 2010. You'll also be hearing from Jared Smith, Executive Director and CEO of Tree Trust in St. Paul, Minnesota. And he's been with Tree Trust for over 20 years. We'll also be hearing from our friends at the Friends of the Urban Forest, Dan Flanagan, who has served as the Executive Director since 2008, as well as Alex Javier, the Education Program Manager at Friends of the Urban Forest. To get us started, before diving into these questions, I would like to hand it off to Lionel Bradford to open our discussion and share some thoughts on this moment in time and how our tree planting and care organizations can play a positive role. So Lionel, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you so much, Matt. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Matt, and AC Trees Arbor Day Foundation for inviting the Greening of Detroit to be a part of this conversation today. It's truly a pleasure, and I've been looking forward to it. I think today, and just to give you a little background on myself, I am from Louisiana, South Louisiana, and so Baton Rouge to be exact. Baton Rouge is the capital city, for those of you who don't know, of Louisiana, and it's a small college town, if you ask most people. On one side of town, we have one of the largest universities in the country, LSU, Louisiana State University. And on the other end of the town, we have the largest historically Black college in the country, Southern University, which is the college that I attended and graduated from. I went to a high school in Baton Rouge called Scotlandville Magnet. And Scotlandville was one of the two schools that was piloted to start the Magnet program in Baton Rouge. The other was Baton Rouge Magnet High School. Scotlandville was, where I went, of course, was 60-40% racial mix. So 60% of the students were African-American, 40% of the students were white. On the other end of town, Baton Rouge Magnet High School was 60-40 in terms of 60% of the students being white and 40% of the students being African-American. I graduated from high school in 1991. In 1991, we actually were very close to having two different graduations. One at Southern University, because that's where the Black kids wanted to have the graduation, and one at Louisiana State University, which is where the white kids wanted to have the graduation. So I'm saying all that to say that in 1991, those were the types of issues that we were dealing with down in Louisiana, types of experiences that I went through. I think what this country is going through right now, it's nothing new. For those of you who think it's new, it's not. This is something that's been going on for years and years and years in terms of racial inequalities and racism. I think that having discussions about this, you see many discussions right now going on. I think being involved in one like this today is very helpful because I think that the only way that we can solve problems like this is to talk about them. Here in Detroit, especially with COVID-19, the pandemic being upon us, we've really been at a stay-at-home order type of society right now, where we couldn't really get out and enjoy life as we know it. And so I think with the George Floyd incident, I feel like COVID-19 was a blessing, so to speak, because I feel like, and let me not say a blessing in terms of the lives that were lost. Of course, I do feel badly about that. And but in terms of the nation just sitting down and not being on the run and being able to see something like this and reflect on it, I think it's really made the difference in terms of how we react to it. Seeing protests, not just in the country and the nation, but protests all across the world right now in terms of Black Lives Matter. I, for one, will tell you now, I think that all lives matter, but particularly right now, Black Lives Matter is what's at the forefront and what we need to be talking about today. I don't want to prolong things. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of questions, but I just wanted to sort of kick off the conversation as we talk about the racial inequalities and how our organizations and what we do can affect that.
Thank you so much, Lionel. I appreciate you opening up this conversation and sharing your perspective.
Thank you.
So now we'll start to dig into these questions, but a quick housekeeping note before. Please know that given the amount of people on this call, you will be unable to unmute yourself. If you have questions that you'd like to ask or comments you'd like to make, please feel free to use the chat area on Zoom or use the raise your hand function. And then I will be able to unmute you. The goal is to get through these questions in about 30 minutes, leaving time for open discussion and Q&A at the end. And this session is being recorded, so you will be able to access the recording in the Alliance for Community Trees Resource Center once uploaded. So now for our questions. And Lionel, we'll start with you and the greening of Detroit. How have you been responding to racial injustice with your staff?
Well, I came to the greening of Detroit in 2010. And at that time, I was brought on to spearhead and formate our workforce development department, adding that department to the organization. And when I came to the greening, I'll be honest with you, the perception around town was that we were the white organization that received all the funding. I heard that plenty of times. In 2012, I was promoted to the vice president of operations within the organization, and we really expanded the organization. We went from 12 employees to 26 employees at that time, and maybe a year later to about 44 employees. So I was in that position at a time where there was a great expansion within the organization. And one of my goals was to really diversify the organization as best I could. And I went about that in several different ways, but thankful today that we are a very, very diverse organization in terms of leadership and staff. Also our board. Our board was an all-white board, and now our board is very diverse in terms of the racial makeup. And so I think that was key in terms of really looking at the dynamic of the staff and board. I do feel that diversity really adds, brings more experiences to the fold, and it makes for a more sustainable organization. And the biggest thing I can say is that I think talking about these issues with your staff and allowing that that openness for anyone to feel free to say what they need to say and get off their chest is key. We have staff meetings. We've had Zoom staff meetings since we've been at home. And we need to talk about this, and you have to talk about this with your staff. And it's no longer, we can't sweep this under the rug any longer.
Great, thank you. Jared, what's been your approach over at Tree Trust?
Yeah, so I just first would say, just really appreciate this facilitation of this conversation. And as you mentioned at the beginning of the intro here, just I don't have the answers. We don't have the answers. I don't, Tree Trust is not a model program that the rest of the country can be looking at. Just we're sorting through these issues like everyone and having the conversation. So I really appreciate Lionel's comments just about, we have to have that conversation. And so I think that's one of the things that we've been talking about is just having an awareness. We have a Asian American who's in our leadership team who does a lot of our diversity training, and he's just been promoting that we have to be talking about the issue, acknowledging it, and that's the only way to solve the problem. If you don't know what you're solving for, you'll never solve it. And so that's been a big part of talking with our staff, is just having those conversations. Again, just being able to let people talk about the things that are important and meaningful to them. And I think just for us, as an organization, I've been the executive director. It'll be 2 years, kind of at the end of this summer. And one of the mandates that our board gave me was that we had to diversify both in staff leadership and staff positions, and as well as the board. And it's just a significant commitment, and it's something that we have put resources toward. And but it's a long-term commitment that we have to make, and we've made strides, but there's a lot of work yet to be done. And I think that we are again calling out the things that need to be called out, that bias, harassment, and diversity is a very broad term. So diversity is kind of the umbrella term that covers all the different perspectives that people come to the table with. But really, the racial disparities, the ethnic disparities, are what we are trying to focus on, and really making sure that we have an organization that is representative of our entire community. That's a goal that we have, and again, putting resources towards that. So I think those would be the things that we're saying as a staff that we are trying to address at Tree Trust.
Great. And now, Alex and or Dan, how have you guys responded to your community in San Francisco on racial injustice?
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Javier. I am the Education Program Manager at Friends of the Urban Forest. I'm a certified arborist with background in forestry, data collection, and then I went on to become a teacher in both outdoor science and in the classroom until I joined FUF about 4 years ago. I started at FUF as the Youth Tree Care Program Manager and have moved on to do all of our education programs. And now I oversee I have 3 full-time staff and about 20 part-time employees, the majority of whom are young people of color. Before I go into how we are addressing these issues and how we have been and are ongoing, I'd just like to start with a little acknowledgement of where we stand as allies for inclusion in the environmental field and the lens that I use to approach every aspect of my work. Injustice and murder of Black and Indigenous people of color as a means to uphold white supremacy are the legacy upon which our country has been founded. And as a non-Black mixed-race person, even if I cannot directly see my contribution to racial injustice, it is measurable through my privilege and my carbon footprint, and I benefit from the systematic destruction of Black and Indigenous heritage and community. The police murdering of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor has become a catalyst to return this truth to the forefront of the national conversation, but this has been an ongoing issue. This painful truth has done incalculable damage and harm to all members of our staff, beginning long before our birth. Some of this harm is obvious, but much of it is unseen and insidious. This is a chronic and systemic issue, and no one and done response can address it. If you have not heard of Green 2.0 or visited diversegreen.org, I encourage you to do so, because their research and reports have shaped much of FUF's work and model of improving justice and equity in our work, and the strategies we have developed thus far to address the inherent inequities. Here's one highlight I would like to share from their research. This report is the most comprehensive report on diversity in the environmental movement, surveying 191 environmental nonprofits, 74 government environmental agencies, and 28 environmental grant-making foundations. People of color are 36% of the US population and comprise 29% of the science and engineering workforce, but they do not exceed 16% of any of the staff of the organizations surveyed. This is what they call the green ceiling. The fact that our work is twice as exclusionary as other hard science fields requires us to look truly into the mirror and face the reality that the environmental organizations are failing when it comes to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. When we look at how that diversity shrinks as power increases, from 22 to 36% people of color as interns to 5 to 13% as board members, the inherent white supremacy within our field becomes something we cannot ignore. This brings up the quote that I'd like to share from Martin Luther King Jr., letter from Birmingham jail. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. At FUF, we have recognized this failing and have worked really hard to address these racial injustices. And really this has come by working to create a brave space among the staff and the programs that I run through just iterative cultural relevancy, asking people about their individual experiences and using that information to pave the way to do things better for everyone. I approach situations with the assumption that I know how to care for trees, but only they know what it's like to do the work on the ground. Inviting people to share their workday, what went well and what could be better, not asking anyone to represent more than their own experience and opinion, and also being alongside people in the field whenever possible. I'm actually out here right now about to lead a tree care workshop to begin our youth tree care program. So it kind of started with the Green Teens, starting with developing individual and anonymous review formats for our youth program that let them, oh, someone asked where FUF is located. We are in San Francisco. We have, so starting with an individual review formats, both anonymous and in person, gave rise to really being able to open and ask the question, what is working well? What could we do better? And what would you like to see in our programs? Some of the things that the Green Teens suggested, like stretching circles before our workday and more ergonomic tools, have now been widely adopted by all of our FUF programs. This helped us create accountability both in how we work with our youth and the people of color in our staff, and also in the way that we represent their work in our grant making processes. We moved on to use this lens to adjust fieldwork protocols when women and people of color felt unsafe or harassed performing certain duties. For community engagement, we recognized the way that it was potentially unsafe to have young Black men walking up to people's doors. So we made sure that we always had a manager on staff out with them, and particularly a light-skinned or white person to help alleviate any sort of racial pressures. That can be directly translated to what we're experiencing with COVID. When this first started, some of my staff members came to say, you know, I want to go back out into the field, but I don't feel comfortable wearing a mask because of the reality of police brutality. And now we can see that that is a real thing. It's, you know, it's never something that went away, but creating a space where our staff felt comfortable to say that and be really frank about their experiences was kind of the first step, just like Lionel said. And, you know, using that path to build trust in a way that listens to and empowers and advocates for our staff has taken a really long time. Some of my staff I've worked with for 3 years, and that process of building trust and iteratively improving their programs has really done a lot to really allow us to have these open and frank conversations. Everything we do in our programs is approached through the lens of, if you feel it is unfair, unsafe, or unfulfilling, we can work to change that. We can't promise to make everything better, but we can work to come to a mutually agreeable solution. And that even brings us to a conversation we had last week when we were all responding to the murder of George Floyd. We had a conversation that kind of seemed silly. We said, so what is your least favorite tree? And one of the staff members said, I don't like magnolias and willows as a Black man because of the history of what magnolias and willows represent. So now we have to ask ourselves the question, we as a tree planting organization, we like to give people choice in the trees they plant, but is it just or culturally responsive to plant trees that maybe signify to some Black people symbols of lynching? So it took a long time to get to that point. There's been a lot of different steps that we have had to take. I can provide a list of those things later because this is not really about programming. And we still have a lot of work to do, but kind of investing and deepening those authentic and reciprocal relationships, both with our workforce development staff, our full-time staff, and the communities we serve is really the path that we have used to get there. Creating a brave space where people actually feel safe to share and have real conversations. And really the way that we look at it at Friends of the Urban Forest is there's a lot of things that we cannot change in the world, but one thing that we can do is affect our staff culture. And really, if we want to use that old adage of being the change we wish to see in the world, we have to start with allowing our staff and getting them to I wouldn't say allowing, but encouraging people to be their most authentic and true selves in everything they do at work, and feeling safe to have these conversations about how it affects them. For right now, that's where we stand. We're listening, we're having people respond, talking about these things in small working groups, in larger staff meetings, before we really decide what the best way is to move forward and respond as an organization to these new resurfacing of the reality of our country. So that's kind of where we are right now.
Thank you so much, Alex. I'm so appreciative of your sentiments, your perspective, and all the work that you guys are doing at Friends of the Urban Forest. I'm going to go ahead and transition into our second question, which is, how have you been responding to racial injustice within your community? And we'll just go ahead and keep this same order. So Lionel, I'll have you start again, please.
Yeah, thanks so much, Alex. That was awesome. But I think in terms of when I think about the community itself here in Detroit and what we do as an organization, the many folks that participate in our programming, we took an opportunity to reach out to these folks to do wellness calls throughout the COVID pandemic and the stay-at-home order, which flowed right into what was going on with George Floyd. And so I think just to really make sure that we are, again, having a conversation with everyone, from our board to our staff to the people we serve through our programming, is the key to all of this. And not only having conversation, but also putting some action plans in place that you can really use to as steps to make change. And so we, as an organization, we reached out to our constituents through our newsletters with a statement that the organization made. We also use our website and social media platforms to talk about make our stance, so to speak, on what's going on. And I think that, we can do everything in our power as an organization, but I think it comes down to the individual. I think everyone really has to examine themselves and examine their actions and their inactions and really figure out what it takes when it comes to really being uncomfortable sometimes about the situation that you're in and what's being said in your circle of friends, with family gatherings, things of that nature. And so I think we have to get to a point, all of us, where we're uncomfortable when we have to call people out for when things are said that are not in line with what we're trying to do here in terms of being racially correct and really just not have any part of this injustice that's going on. Detroit is a little different in that the people that we serve, we're a city that's about 90% African American. And so most of the work that we do is all in Detroit, and it's reaching out to that community. And so right now, it's really just talking and listening to what the community is saying, and again, putting action plans together so that we can know how to move forward and make change in regards to what's going on in society today.
Great, thank you, Lionel. I really love that idea of wellness calls. I think that's really cool. Jared, we'll go to you now. How has Tree Trust responded to your community? I imagine being located in greater Minneapolis had a part to play in your response.
Yeah, so man, just Lionel, appreciate your comments there. So there's kind of a multifaceted approach. I would say our demographics of our participants are 60% people of color, 40% white. And so we've spent a lot of time listening to our participants, and even, you know, a lot of our staff live in the areas that were greatly affected, and so there's just been yeah, a lot of spending time listening to one another. And I love that comment, Lionel, you made about just being uncomfortable, getting to being uncomfortable, like having those conversations, just addressing those things. And that's one thing that just I've been just thinking a lot more about. And honestly, I would confess to this a whole group, even part of this conversation is it's a little bit intimidating, and I don't have the answers, and I want to learn from those who are not like me. And so I'm not here again telling everyone that we've got it figured out, but I think part of this is going into these spaces where maybe we haven't gone before, or I haven't gone before, our organization hasn't, and we absolutely have to be here. And so we have a duty, a responsibility to everyone in the community to be a loud voice for healing and restoration. And so a big part of it is, you know, who can we work with in this community? Who's on the ground and who's working in these spaces? And so we're not coming saying, hey, you know, we're the hammer and we're going to come pound the nail. We're talking to, and we're meeting with kind of a consortium right now of nonprofits who are all have different skills and abilities. And so we want Tree Trust to play the role that Tree Trust is intended to play. Where can we be best? Where can we be most effective, and not be in spaces where we shouldn't be? And so really leveraging the strengths that we have, and feeling strongly that that's the way that we can best serve the community and address these racial disparities that we know are just front and center as well as they should be. Recently, we just put out a survey to over 700 of our past and current participants to find out what kind of things do they need from Tree Trust as an organization. So really, it's listening to all constituencies and then acting on that information that we receive. Again, not presupposing the answer, but really asking what do they need, and then responding in the way that the community needs to be responded to.
That's great. And sorry to put you on the spot, Jared, but what kind of response rate did you get on that survey? That's really cool.
It actually was really good. It was over 100 respondents, so we were kind of in that 17-18% response rate. So we were super encouraged by that. And just, you know, one of the areas that Tree Trust focuses on is economic disparity. One of the ways that we feel that we are best positioned to help is to help link training to jobs. And so really providing that career pathway for young people, and especially in the green industry, we know that it's not well represented in communities of color. And so we want to see that change big time. And so that's where we're investing our resources. And we want to figure out, how do we match what a participant, someone in the community who wants that long-term career. And that was actually one of the pieces of data that we got, that these young people, they want a career. They want a long-term sustainable career. They don't want just a job or more training, although that's part of the pathway to get them there. But they want a career that they can support themselves and their family. And so that's where we want to be. And also there's a lot of interest in people want to help their community. They want to help the environment. And I think there's part of the education that we can do is to show them that we can link their passions, what they're motivated to do, with this industry that they're maybe not aware of, and then we can show them a path forward to success there. So that's how I would answer that.
That's great. Yeah, and I can't wait to learn more about how those survey responses continue to inform your programming at Tree Trust. Alex, we'll go back to you. How have you responded to your community in San Francisco?
Yeah, so the first thing that FUF did was kind of amass a small committee of members from each of our programs to create a campaign that we called We call it environmental justice equals racial justice in our campaign. We wanted to recognize that the EJ movement was started by Black, Indigenous people of color as a response to racial injustice and privilege turning a blind eye to the environmental symptoms of racism. And we really wanted to have authentic allyship and cultural humility in this. I really liked what Jared said about leaning in and into spaces to kind of engage more people, and also really love what Lionel said about having what we call brave spaces in our youth work, encouraging people to get uncomfortable while still having a trusting relationship. And so we wanted to kind of give credit where credit was due. And as a team, we decided that now was not the time to take up bandwidth or any attention from the conversation that we're all having, and instead direct our audience and use our platform as a way to direct people towards partner organizations and local leaders in our Black community. So for the week following the murder of George Floyd, we highlighted each day local grassroots organizations that were working in Bayview and Hunters Point in San Francisco, which is designated as the city's African American and Cultural Arts District. And we specifically chose organizations that we have built authentic relationships with as a way to leverage that relationship towards allyship in support of our local movement. We also wanted to make sure that we made space for people to speak for themselves. So we shared the name of the organization, we shared their own words off of their website, and when possible, we also uplifted their founder, their director, someone who we could acknowledge their hard work and vision. So we let their words speak for themselves. So you can look at our Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook to learn about these organizations: Bayview Magic, Imprint City, Literacy for Environmental Justice, San Francisco General's Wraparound Project, Bayview Hunters Point Clinic, the Hunters Point Family, and Rebuilding Together. In this process, we really wanted to assess our work in a culturally responsive way and look at, like Jared said, the ways in which we're coming in with a certain skill set, and not saying we have all of the answers, but saying this is what we can do. How can we help? We're arborists, we're foresters, and we can come in with those skills to assist the community, but we don't have all of the answers. And a lot of these organizations have been doing this work in a lot longer and a lot realer ways. So really just kind of share what they have been doing. And we have a very large mailing list of tens of thousands of people to direct their attention toward what those people have been doing. And this kind of came out of a shift in the way that we have been doing our community engagement programs. As we have moved into new communities as a way to address inequitable access in urban canopy cover in San Francisco, we've really had to build those relationships with those organizations and kind of change the mindset to showing up to events or showing up to meet with these folks, whether or not it's going to guarantee a tree in the ground. So, we came and we wanted to be a friend and an ally first, to really bring the community together. The way that we have reframed the work we do is to say, instead of coming in and saying, we know what'll help with this situation, more trees. What do we have to do to let us plant more trees? We come in now saying we're experts at bringing people together and planting trees. How can we use those skills to support you and your community? In the same way, it's kind of like reversing that golden rule from treat others the way you would want to be treated, to ask others how you would like to treat them and use your unique gifts to do that. And that's kind of helped us really build clout in those communities and work to address the holistic system of environmental justice by offering what we can, but making space for the experts to do what they do. And that's what we're working on moving forward as well.
That's awesome. Really great points, Alex, because I think a lot of our initial reactions are to try to reinvent the wheel with some of this stuff when really we should. There's so many different organizations locally and nationally that are doing this kind of work every day. And so I love to hear that you guys have been working with those local organizations. We'll transition to our third and final question, which is how and what steps are you taking to be a positive piece to a solution? Maybe not the solution, but a solution. And Lionel, we'll start again with you.
Great. Well, I mean, I think that first I want to say that, we're not a civil rights organization. We're not a political organization or a civil service organization, anything like that. We are an environmental organization. And I think as the president of the organization, it's my duty to not take us into those lanes. And so I feel like we have to stay true to our mission as an organization. However, I think we have to look at what we do and how our programming and our organization can shape the lives of the people that we touch and how we can make an impact upon them so that we can influence or have some type of influence on what they would like to do moving forward. I can't tell you how many meetings that I've been to in the past 10 years for work that I've been the only person of color in the room. From a room of 10 people to a room of 100 people or more. And so that tells me that we are missing, there's a gap there in this industry because you're not getting the experiences from Asian Americans or Latino Americans or Arab Americans. I mean, there's a huge gap there. And so over the past 10 years, the Greening of Detroit, we've really made it a priority to diversify our staff, our leadership, and our board. And so we want to look more like the community we serve. And so with that said, I think that we have to, one of our main goals is to cultivate that next generation of environmental stewards. And through our Green Corps program, that's what we're doing. We're trying to make sure that we are exposing youth and exposing adults as well through our workforce training programs to these fields, so that we can have more representation in these fields and our voices can be heard in this field. And I think those are some of the steps that we're taking right now in terms of diversifying, cultivating, and really staying in our lane to make sure that we can take our little piece of the pie and do what we have to make positive change in light of what's going on, not just today, but what's been going on.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lionel. Jared, we'll go to you on what steps are you taking at Tree Trust to be a positive piece to a solution?
Yeah, so much of this has been said already. I think Lionel said it earlier, but first of all, it starts with me. As a leader of the organization, I have a responsibility to make sure that Tree Trust is pursuing racial diversity and diversity in other aspects, that is a priority of the organization. And again, that's board, senior leadership, and staff. And so one of the things we have to do is eliminate any of the barriers that prevent us from being able to do that. And so one of the things we've been rolling out most recently through a strategic planning process is that, we really have not had in the past a leadership pipeline from our programs and through the work that we do. And it's happened, but it's been kind of organic, and we want to make that very intentional, that when especially young people are working for us, that they see an opportunity, not just see, but they have a pathway in front of them that, hey, I can be a leader here in this organization, not just I get to do this work, or I get to work with them, but I can be here and make my voice heard. So that's a really important piece of that for us. Another is just kind of going back to that survey, is constituency-driven programming. Is again, what are the needs and how are we serving them? So we're not just being a hammer. And then lastly, just is partnership. Tree Trust can't do this alone. There's lots of services that Tree Trust may not be able to provide to a young person, because we are dealing with, entire people that, when we think about well-being, it's physical, it's emotional, it's spiritual, it's economic, it's all of these things. And Tree Trust needs to do what it does best, and then partner with other organizations so that the whole person is getting the support and the help that they need. And but we're doing that all together collectively.
That's great. Thank you, Jared. And then Dan, I believe you are on the line for this next question, or for this third question. What steps are you taking to be a positive piece to a solution in San Francisco? Dan, I do have you unmuted, so you should be good unless you're not connected to the audio. Oh, here we go. Dan, are you there? And Alex, if you're still on, I don't know if you had touched base with Dan on what he wanted to cover for this third one or not, while we wait to see if we can figure out his audio.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I know he's on the call. I just saw that, he was there. He said we were chatting a little bit behind the scenes. So hopefully he can get in there. But without stealing too much of Dan's thunder, really what we have done is kind of take a lot of our work and codify it into our strategic plan, both in terms of organizational steps and also in terms of what we're doing to move forward as our values and our mission statement. Dan, are you there? Last chance to chime in. Don't want to take your spot.
I don't see him on anymore, Alex.
Okay. So anyway, like I said, we have really worked hard over the last 4 years to create a pathway and a ladder for our workforce development programs to really have meaningful inclusion of these candidates into our management and leadership.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
There you go. You're good.
Whoa! There we go. I'm sorry, I've been listening this whole time. I didn't realize I was unmuted. Okay, let me start all over again. Hold on. I just want to get my comments. Okay, good morning, everyone. I started off the last time saying how wonderful it is to hear from both you folks on how you're trying to deal with all these issues. I'm going to take a little bit of a different tack, and I think I'm going to end up exactly in the same spot that all of you have been talking about. To start with, I want to tell you a very quick story about how how FUF has fundamentally changed the communities we work in and how we have expanded the mission of our mission of serving our city of San Francisco. And so the story is in November, and I'm going to tell a story that many of you may know, but I think it's relevant to what we're doing now, talking about now. In November of 2016, FUF was successful in passing something called Prop E, a ballot initiative that radically changed how all the street trees in San Francisco would be managed, and more importantly, funded. Prop E created a dedicated funding source for the care, not the planting, of all of our street trees in perpetuity. I will not go into the details, but by doing so, FUF totally blew up its business model. Historically, we planted trees at a reduced price to homeowners and went to our donor base to keep the cost of those trees as low as possible. Now, these are city trees, and we're totally dependent upon the city to pay for the planting of our trees. So two things happened after the passage of Prop E. First, my board wanted to rush in right away to do a strategic planning process. And secondly, and perhaps more importantly, the city now owned all the street trees, and FUF and the city had the ability to plant wherever we wanted to, and we did not have to rely on homeowners to, quote, buy a tree. Back to my lovely board, who in truth were amazing. Lots of pressure to conduct a strat planning process. I fought it by saying right after Prop E, we didn't know what the landscape of our work looked like. Therefore, we needed some time before we started to create a 3-year plan. We compromised by conducting a process of creating a worldview and a North Star statement to drive our work for the coming months. I want to share with you that North Star statement written in 2017. Here it is. San Franciscans are feeling the effect of human-induced climate change and the fraying of the social fabric, which current US government policies threaten to worsen. Concerned San Franciscans want to take local action that improves the situation and has positive impact for themselves and the future generations. So, fraying of the social fabric. Good Lord, how prescient. So back to the question I'm supposed to be answering. How are you taking steps to be a positive piece of the solution? In the following years, after writing that statement, FUF worked very closely with the Bureau of Urban Forestry to come up with a new plan of how we're going to roll out our planting policy. Remember, Prop E only had money for the care of trees, no new money for planting trees. But now we had the ability to go into neighborhoods that had dramatically low canopy coverage. Two things happened. Right away, as we started going into those communities, which Alex has had direct experience with and has been talking about, the first thing we did, we were devoted to create, we devoted a great deal of time and effort to plant in what we called underserved neighborhoods. In the first year, we had tremendous resistance. First, people didn't really trust that the city would actually take care of the trees. And the majority of the folks were saying that we asked to get trees, just basically said no. It was a very tough year for us. And we had been terribly excited to plant in areas that had the lowest canopy in the city and perhaps the greatest need, but hit with such strong resistance. After 18 months, what I called a really strong headwind to our efforts, we did embark on a new strategic planning process. A little more background before we start talking about the planning process. 20 years ago, FUF started a paid job preparedness program for teenagers 14 to 18 years old, underserved populations, to learn about arboriculture and help us prune our trees. We call them our green teens. About 6 years ago, we dipped our toes into the world of workforce development by partnering with an extraordinary nonprofit that worked with young adults that were victims of gang violence called the Wraparound Program. We served as the last part of that program to build job readiness skills by learning about arboriculture. We soon realized that there was a real need in our city and perhaps a gateway to working with FUF and for FUF, but you didn't necessarily have to be, shouldn't be required to be shot or stabbed. Ergo, we started our Green Crew in our first workforce development program. Quick aside, instead of the typical model of workforce development, we chose and continue to choose to hire folks for several years instead of the normal 3 years and out. So we launched our strategic planning process in 2018, finished in 2019. Embedded in that plan was a commitment to work differently with the communities we were planting in. We were no longer selling trees to folks who were interested in getting a tree. We were now needing to create a partnership with community groups to help us in educating homeowners on the importance of greening their neighborhoods. Additionally, we committed to the efforts that we've been working on for years to diversify our staff and board. I think we've been very successful with staff. We still have a ways to go to diversify our board. Secondly, we had a vision to create a ladder of training opportunities that allow for a meaningful promotion of low-income youth in our Green Teen program and young adults of color from our workforce development to become permanent full-time employees and managers. Today, almost 2 years after that vision, we have 3 folks, full-time employees: tree care coordinator, green crew manager, and planting coordinator, all working for us. And that is an example of our strategic plan in action. So I stole the next paragraph from Alex. The inclusion of urban people of color into urban forestry is one crucial step in expanding the narrative of our work to incorporate the perspectives of those communities which are the greatest need of the benefits of street trees provide, deepening our roots in those communities and cementing our community-based model as holistic environmental justice through greening efforts. So the fact that Prop E created approximately, it has been an iterative, so how are we taking those steps? It's been an iterative process. Unbeknownst to us, by helping to create Prop E, we created a source of protected revenue. And currently that's $20 million a year for well-paid green jobs to take care of our street trees. Public Works is desperate for qualified folks to fill those jobs. We hope to be a ladder for those jobs. Also, Prop E drove us to address the serious inequities of greening in our city. That's how we landed in these communities. By focusing the majority of our efforts in planning in the underserved communities that have lowest canopy in our city and perhaps the greatest need, all of our highways, by the way, transect those communities. We have fundamentally changed how we work with the neighborhoods that we want to green. The fact that our social fabric has been seriously frayed over the past several years. Before COVID struck, we were seeing more volunteers coming out to our plantings, in some cases twice the number that we had been used to. People really want to do something positive. So I'm going to leave my comments on a bit of a downer. San Francisco is currently looking at a $1.7 billion deficit, perhaps even more over the next 2 years. When I said we totally blew up our business model, never in my wildest nightmares did I envision a situation when the city would have so little or no money to plant trees. So we will be continuing to write this story in the coming months of how FUF will incorporate all these profound changes and these learnings that we've acquired as we work to live in this new reality of COVID-19, the stark reality that all of us are facing.
Thank you so much, Dan. It's really cool and profound to hear how thoughtful you guys are being in your programming at Friends of the Urban Forest, and I'm glad we got your audio figured out for you to join.
Me too.
Thank you so much, panel. I know we are running long. We're currently 1 minute over the hour allotted, so I would still like to open this up for questions. So, and speakers, I'm going to unmute you right now, and unless you need to get going, I would love for you to stick around and be able to answer some questions if you're able to. Jared, I'm trying to unmute you too. There we go.
I'm going to stick around for a little bit.
Okay, perfect. And so everyone, just a reminder, please use the chat box if you have a question, or feel free to use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. We'll keep an eye on that, but we do have a couple questions to get started. We had a couple questions get sent over earlier this week. And so these questions are: how do we, as urban foresters, come to terms with our part in gentrification and continued investment in areas of affluence, namely white communities? Investment of green infrastructure in communities of historic divestment can lead to gentrification and displacement. What is our role in solving this? How can we support social programs that address and solve this issue? And that comes from Allie at Forterra in Seattle. So thank you, Allie. I appreciate it. And Allie, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you too if you have anything else that you would like to add to that.
No, I think that about covers it. Thank you.
I'm going to take a quick crack and then please be followed by other people. We ran head right into that, those 18 months that we started trying to plant in the southeast of the city. And it was a huge, huge challenge. And it's a challenge that we will continue to be facing. I think Alex really spoke to it in how we have decided to change the idea of let's go plant trees and these are the best things for you. Instead, we're working with community groups and trying to have them understand the value of perhaps greening. And we have an insanely expensive real estate market here in San Francisco, which might change in the near future. But literally planting a tree was associated with people wanting to sell their houses and move out. And so it was a high hill to climb. I don't know, Alex, do you have anything else to add?
I mean, I would say that, yeah, but just to add, reiterate that we started by trying to go in and plant trees because we wanted to address the inequity in urban canopy. And really then it came down to recognizing that in order to know what the communities want, we have to work with the people who have been there for a long time. So trying to ask those community groups, well, we got this funding to plant trees, where do you think we should put them? And at the same time, giving people a choice to defer planting. The city has taken a stance where eventually they do want to plant every possible tree, but providing that choice so it's not coercive. And that's really given people a sense that, at the end of the day, we are a community serving organization rather than one who's just trying to plant trees to improve the real estate market. And that has meant, putting in some work like marking sites, even sometimes cutting concrete before people say, hold on, I didn't know this was really happening. I don't want a tree. But by going in and then saying, yes, we respect your opinion. We'll plant these trees somewhere else where, your community leaders say that you could use them, has really helped us alleviate that kind of pressure. And at the same time, having our youth and workforce development programs really helps with that, because then we can not only say we plant trees, but then, we're using those trees as a job opportunity and training program to really provide economic prosperity to the young people in your community. And both of those things together have helped us avoid gentrifying at times. So.
Great, thank you guys. Jared or Lionel, did you have a take on that perchance?
I think those guys summed it up pretty well.
Great.
Next one's yours.
Got it.
All right, just a reminder, folks, you can ask questions in the chat box or raise your hand so I can unmute you. We had, let's see. So we had another question in the chat box, and you guys might have answered this already in previous answers, so let me know if you have any additional thoughts to this. But Lou in the chat says, I would like to hear more about how folks are going into underserved communities to plant trees and getting meaningful engagement without negative consequences, not so much bringing the hammer.
I can take a stab at this one. I hear what you're saying, Dan and Alex. We've been there. I think that it all starts with engagement. I think we want to be invited into communities rather than feel like we're going in and forcing our will. And that starts with engagement, especially here in Detroit. A city like Detroit, if you're not trusted by the community, you will not get anywhere. And so we have, over the years, really beefed up our engagement. We have folks that look like the folks that they're going to talk with, number one. Number two, where the message is different. When it comes to with all that's going on right now, most people in urban areas, planting trees are not high on their priority list. I mean, they want to know how to get to work, how to get a job, you know, how to put food on the table. So these are things that are pressing for them, not to plant a tree. And so at the greening, you know, we use that tree as a mechanism, as Alex stated, for economic prosperity. That tree can represent two jobs. Someone has to plant that tree and someone has to care for it. And we're training folks to do both. And so once that message is relayed in a way that the folks here in Detroit can really understand it, you see that the tree becomes a little more important to them than just a tree in a yard, and the environmental aspects that we all know that come with environmental benefits that comes with trees. But then you have that economic and that social and that piece as well. And so we really push that. But I tell you, it all starts with engagement.
Great. Thank you, Lionel. Jared, did you have any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I think you just Lionel hit it out of the park. It's just you've got to be invited in, and that's where we found a lot of our success is the community invites us. So I think we're maybe a little more opportunistic that way. So I think, yeah, that's how we've had better results, is that there's a need that's been identified in the community, and Tree Trust is part of that solution. One of the things I just maybe would add, and we haven't had a terrible amount of success with this, but we also, it's not just planting trees in the community, but it's also having, you know, pocket nurseries or small nurseries like gravel bed nurseries, where it's, yeah, we're doing that, both the caring and the planting. So then, yeah, it's not just we've planted this tree and we've walked away. There's a little more, there's jobs involved, and there's responsibility, and then there's a sense of ownership for caring for those, and then helping identify where those trees can get planted can be really useful as well.
Definitely. Lionel, we had a follow-up question for you after your last point. What are some things that you did to gain community trust, like activities, events, door knocking, etc.?
Yeah, I think that, you know, all the above we did, but I think more importantly, when you have to tap into the folks in the community that are respected. And oftentimes it's not the Greening of Detroit that's delivering the message, but it's a community ambassador that's delivering that message. And so people are going to trust people that they know. And so whether you look like them or not, they have to know you and trust you. And so we started a community ambassador program about 7 years ago, where we work with people in the community who go out in different areas that they live in, and they actually start that conversation for us, and able to get us into the door and build that trust with the community. So that's one way we've done it in terms of engagement. I think another way too is using the programming that we have. We have a youth employment program where we employ, we have in the past employed upwards of 200 youth in the summer. And those youth, I mean, we engage those families, and those families, based on the experience that their kids have had with us, they become advocates for the organization. And so we use all avenues to find bridges to connect and build respect within the community. So.
Absolutely. Jared, Alex, and Dan, I'll leave that open to you as well if you have anything in addition to add.
I have nothing to add.
Okay. So we do have a question for our friends at Friends of the Urban Forest. Amber asks, what prompted the change in your community engagement strategies?
Well, following Prop E being passed, the city said, go into these neighborhoods and start planting trees. And we bushy-tailed, went in there, we're excited, we're green, we're going to transform your neighborhood, and it's all going to be about resilience, et cetera. And they didn't want trees. They said no. And I think there was a part of it, I think a very large part of deep distrust on the part of these communities of the city actually following through. We kept on saying, hey, the city's going to take care of this tree. It's no responsibility for you. It's going to add value. You know, it's a really good thing. And all those messages fell flat. And our deferral rate in the beginning of those 18 months I talked about in my comments was as high as 75%, saying, you know, thanks a lot, guys, but we don't want a tree. Now, we had funding to plant trees, and we're only get paid if we planted the trees from the state. So that put us in kind of a dilemma. So we kept on banging our head against that wall. And then it was a community engagement people that said, whoa, we've got to change things now. And basically, you know, we should have called Lionel right away. And he could have said, hey, you know, this is what you should be doing. And we basically learned that on a very experiential level, that we had to be involved in the communities and we had to have ambassadors. In fact, I just wrote down, I love the word community ambassador. I want to steal that. And we're still really faced with that dilemma, but our deferral rate's coming down, not as dramatically as we wish, but we do find that we have to spend a lot of time in the outreach.
Alex, did you have anything else to add to that?
I think that covers it.
Okay, perfect. We do have a question from my friend Travis at Trees Atlanta. Travis says, when you go into Black neighborhoods to plant trees, are the employees who are leading those planting projects Black? And if they are Black, was the result still as difficult?
I can tell you from our perspective, our community forester is not Black, and he leads most of our community plantings. However, what I can tell you is that he's well liked and well known in most of the neighborhoods that we plant in, and most of the neighborhoods are here in Detroit. And so, you know, I think there's something to be said there by having someone that represents the community, it looks like the community, to lead those efforts. However, it's a big, even more important to have someone that has built relationships and that the community is respecting to make that planting be successful, and not only successful but sustainable.
We have 4 planting managers that run our actual plantings. And one of them is a Black female, who is a spectacular person to begin with. And I don't know if there's any added benefit. That would be hard to be. I don't know how we would quantify that, because all of our plantings, that when we actually do planting days, they're pretty exciting, and the vibe has been really good. I think that the work that's been done ahead of time of deepening our connection to the community has really set that up. And then we bring all of our volunteers in too. So I think it's truly added value. We love having Zema on board because she's just an incredible employee, but I don't think it's absolutely required, because we have just as many plantings that are run by white females.
I'll add on to kind of say what Dan said, where I think it's a lot of the front, we stack a lot of the community engagement in front. And our community engagement manager, before working for Friends of the Urban Forest, did for many years work doing other environmental justice work in that neighborhood. So she has a lot of connections there. And that's really helped kind of shape our message. And I'll say that part of our workforce development program is doing that community engagement. So oftentimes we do have at least one person of color doing that door knocking. But San Francisco is a weird situation. We are only 6% Black and African American. So realistically, we have to address the fact that, you know, there is suspicion in general due to our inherent bias and racism. So we will always have, if we have a person of color door knocking and doing community engagement, a white ally to back them up. And we never have 2 people go, or 1 person going out at once, because individuals could feel unsafe. And so, you know, that has been a big part of our strategy, is to, you know, get multiple people there with multiple perspectives, and, you know, not necessarily convincing folks, but, you know, having people going out and being together as we do it to provide multiple perspectives in the work that we do, to start it off before we even get to the planting phase.
Great, thank you, Alex. Jared, I'll open that up to you if you have anything to add on that.
Yeah, I just echo Dan's sentiments. Just there's a lot of energy and excitement typically with our plantings. Our director of community forestry, a woman named Karen Zumach, just does an awesome job leading these and working with the communities. And we always try and invite the community that we are planting in. And so yeah, we tend to have a lot of positive feedback, but there's also a lot of, there can be reluctance about those trees because of the fears or concerns that this is going to get abandoned, this is going to be a financial liability. We dealt a lot with that when a tornado came through North Minneapolis, and there's been a lot of replanting efforts in those neighborhoods. And so there were definitely sentiments. And so there was a lot of work being done to yeah, help extol the benefits of the trees. And then also to work that Tree Trust as an organization is committed to long-term care to these trees, that we're not just yeah, planting and abandoning them, that we're gonna be around to see them yeah, be taken care of, certainly for a number of years. So I think just that echoes what both Lionel and Dan were talking about.
Great, thanks, Jared. And so that, I believe we answered all of the questions in the chat box. I know we went long, so thank you everyone for sticking around. This is a really important conversation, and I think it was important to answer all of these questions. I will go ahead and get it closed down for the conversation. I just got a couple slides here, but I really, let's see, do you guys see the main slide?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I really just want to thank everyone for joining us today. I really appreciate you participating in this important discussion. Thank you so much to our panelists. There's so much value in this peer community, as we all recognize that we may not know the right answer, but we're willing to stay educated, informed, and connected with one another as we work towards positive solutions together. So as I mentioned before, this call has been recorded, and it will be uploaded to the Alliance for Community Trees Resource Center for our members. So if you are a member and unsure of how to access this member portal, please reach out to me. There are other resources we've tried to make available to ACT members. We have a collaborative Google Doc where members can share how their organizations have responded to racial injustice, in addition to other educational resources on diversity, equity, and inclusion. These all get shared in our member edition of TreeView News, as well as the Alliance for Community Trees member Facebook group. So I really encourage you to access those if you haven't already. In the coming weeks, we will be sending out updates on new Alliance for Community Trees working groups that will focus on areas like diversity, equity, inclusion, as well as fundraising and partnerships, leadership, and a few other subject areas. So please keep your eyes peeled in the member edition of the TreeView News, as well as the member Facebook page. Yeah, so again, I want to thank you all for joining us, and we'll end the conversation and we'll send out this recording once it's uploaded. So thanks again to our panelists, and thank you all for taking the time today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, Alex, Dan. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.